completely fucked up.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Destination Truth. Today I have a really important video, and considering the timing of when Antifa was planning on starting to do their revolution and overthrow the government, I think it's really important to start talking to Antifa. So this is a video of why Antifa literally is the new neo-Nazi party. Now don't go away just yet. I know that sounds probably really offensive to you, especially if you're a millennial. Because we like to get offended, but I have some really important points that are rather self-evident once you know some of the points behind government styles, as well as some historical points that I think you should really hear real quick. Okay, so let's go back to school just for a minute. Now, I know if you're like me, you went to government school where they taught you that there's two spectrums, there's the right wing and the left wing, and on the right, on the far, far right, there's fascism. And on the far, far left, there's communism. And neither are good, but you want to get somewhere in the balance of the middle, and that's a good place to be. And we have a constitutional republic, which is good because it's like a democracy, right? But there's a whole bunch of lies in there, actually, that we need to point out. Let's start with the spectrum. Okay, so here we have the spectrum as I think it should be, because right versus left doesn't actually make sense. So from the get-go, public schools are trying to bastardize or confuse you as to government types and what the spectrum is as a whole. Because the spectrum, right versus left, doesn't actually make sense. Like, what are you trying to tell people? Is it good versus evil? And you can make that analogy, and in my opinion, no government versus total government kind of is a good versus evil, because in total government, there's never been a single case in world history where it hasn't led to all kinds of problems, resulting in either genocide from fascists, as we know from the Nazis, or famine, man-made famines, and giant police states that have basically rounded up and killed millions of their own people. And right now I'm talking about communist China and the Soviet Union, both of which made man-made famines, which resulted in the death of millions. So in the total grand scope of things, communist China and communist Russia killed more millions of people than World War I and or II. And definitely killed a lot more people than the Nazis did, in fact. Okay, so now we're going to talk about types of government, which one we have, and which one Antifa is trying to get. So let's start with the smallest kind of government that there possibly is, which is no government at all, and we call that anarchy. It's pretty much self-evident. Anarchy is literally, absolutely no government. This is basically the Wild West. There's no, maybe there are police people there, but that would be self-anointed people that decide to help govern the people. There's no actual overarching leadership at all whatsoever. What comes after this is something that we have never probably talked about in government schools, which is called a minarchy. It sounds like anarchy, but with a min right there. Minarchy is basically the same thing as an anarchy, except there is a federal government and it only has one purpose, and its only purpose is to defend its people from external threat and domestic threat. But it's got a military basically that protects its people from armies and such. Next, something that has happened in the world. Okay, so I wanted to fast forward a bit so I don't have to do writing in front of you. But so we've basically got the whole right side of the spectrum now. So the next one is critocracy, and that is actually the rule by strength, or the rule by the strongest. And that was actually used somewhat in Samoa and Tonga, where usually the leaders of the tribes or the kingdoms were basically the strongest warriors. And when they became old, a new strongest warrior would overthrow them, and it was basically just ruled by the strongest men. Feudalism came next, and feudalism we actually have a lot of experience with. Feudalism existed in Europe for a long time, for some extent, and especially feudal Japan, where small kingdoms were basically ruled by a small ruling class, and they disseminated their power accordingly. But it was always a rather small group with one leader, and that one leader was somewhat of a monarch, but it was over a small group of people. And if it's not over a small group of people, then it's not really feudalism. And feudalism also consists of one supreme leader basically disseminating his power to many, many others, like knights, for example, or samurai. Next would be the technocracy. Now, you could argue that technocracy would actually be closer to total government, but it depends on how they rule. Now, technocracy is basically the rule by the most intelligent, like engineers and scientists. But if they don't make a total government state, then they actually could rule with minimal government and using technology to run a country well. So this one is kind of up in the air, but the next one, which is the one that we technically in the United States are, is a republic. Now, we have specifically a constitutional republic, but that is basically implied because the difference between a republic and a democracy is that the republic has limitations to government that are inherent, that cannot be taken out by vote of the population. So in a democracy you can do that. In a good democracy, it's total rule by the people, which is the people have the ability to vote in or out anything they want, including their government. If they want to overthrow their own government, they could do it by voting, or if they want to, for example, if Texas or California wanted to separate from the United States, in a democracy you could do that. In a republic, technically we can't do that because of changes we made to our laws thanks to the Civil War. So in between though, republic and democracy, I believe we should make a mention of oligarchy here before some others that you'll see down the line. Now, an oligarchy is ruled by few, and again, this could be over here, but there's a lot on this side that I'm going to mention, so I'm going to actually mention it here. Ruled by few is basically a small ruling class. However, the ruling class is subject to change, so it's not a rule by someone who's appointed by God, or it's not someone who's appointed by himself, or by his strength or something like that. So basically, more often than not, it's aristocrats that are wealthy and prominent in society. Maybe they're government socialites, or they're senators and they have a lot of experience with law, so they stay in law as one of the rulers. Or maybe they are military retirees. Basically, at some point in time, I would say the Roman Empire became much more of a oligarchy. But then again, most of the power resided with one man, the emperor, so it's kind of hard to say exactly. But their government was very dicey, even though it officially was a democracy, because it had a senate. Nonetheless, moving on. Oh, I've already made mention of democracy. Democracy is right in the middle, I would say, in the sense that you can literally do anything you want with voting. Alright, so I want to apologize for writing this side in small letters. I accidentally did that, so I made this side a little bit bigger and easier to see, because we're also going to be focusing more on this side over here, because in the real world we do have more of these governments, because it's a natural tendency for power to want to get more power. So most governments that are older than 100 years are one of these governments, because they want to acquire more government over time, or more power, more state power. Anyway, so we stopped at democracy. The next one is called a plutocracy, which is basically an oligarchy, but it is exclusively ruled by the rich. Okay, so yeah, again, plutocracy, ruled by the rich, which I would even argue that is the true government of the United States right now, which is basically a ruling class of rich elites. Next is a theocracy. Theocracy is ruled by religion, or ruled by God. And on planet Earth, there's really only two good examples. The Vatican, or Vatican City, is in fact a theocracy. They believe they're ruled by God. And then there's countries like Saudi Arabia, where even though they have a royal family, they do believe that family is basically appointed by God, and they do let their religion rule the country and dictate all of the rules and regulations that normally a court would have to decide on. So theocracy, it's on this spectrum for sure though, because if you look at the last 1,000 years in Europe, there's a lot of things that most people today would agree they don't want, like the French Revolution or the Inquisition. There's a lot of religion involved in deciding who to kill, basically. So, yeah, theocracy typically isn't the best kind of government. Even today in Saudi Arabia, it's hard to find the footage, but there's a lot of honor killings even in the streets of Saudi Arabia today, and that is based on basically anyone who's disobeying the laws of God. They are willing to behead them literally in the streets. So using some degree of fear tactics, they'll force the rest of the population to obey. Monarchy is next. I think we all know what that is. It's basically one person or a ruling family. The difference between monarchy and some of these other types of government, which have a limited size of a ruling class, is that monarchies almost always are in fact ruled by a royal family that is appointed by birth. Dictator is next. Dictatorships are ruled by one as well, but it's just one person that is basically usurped power. Another name for dictatorships is an autocracy. An autocracy is basically when someone assumes power. Enough said on that. Militarism, we don't have a lot of examples of that other than maybe some militaristic countries in Africa and Japan in the early parts of the 20th century. Leading up to World War II, they had a emperor who they said was appointed by God or even was a god. However, the military itself did dictate most of the rules that regulated the actual politics within Japan at the time. Now we're getting into the really juicy three here, and I'm going to make some important points about these three that I think everyone today really needs to hear. Fascism. So it separates fascism from others is that fascism is basically a dictatorship. However, it focuses on nationalism. So when a nationalistic dictatorship where the majority of the country actually agrees with that dictator, they use military power to suppress all opposition. That's fascism. And that's what Antifa is doing right now. Now, Antifa states that they're anti-fascist, and they actually want, for the majority of the members that I've seen, actually want communism. Now, I've written communism in red because communism on Earth never actually has really existed in a perfect state, which is a fallacy that all communists use. Whenever you bring up, oh, why would you want communism if the Soviet Union killed, over 66 million of its own inhabitants or citizens? Or if you use China as an example, they killed millions of their own as well. So if you bring these points up, most communists will use the fact that communism actually never did exist perfectly, and those were just bad versions of socialism mixed with a autocracy or a fascist government, basically. Now, I think that's a really dangerous argument to use because the thing is that communism never will exist. Now, knowing some of the writings of Lenin and such, you'll hear that there's a certain period of time in which to establish communism you will always need a dictatorship and some kind of an evil hybrid of socialism and a dictatorship in order to get to here, where naturally or magically the dictatorship will disintegrate and a magical communist society will exist afterwards where everyone shares everything and everything's equal. Unfortunately, as a human being, there's really no way to actually make that exist on planet Earth because people naturally want more. It's just the natural way of things on planet Earth. And one of the biggest movements of our time is this socialist Marxism, which basically is to defy nature and believing that you can defy nature. The only problem is that's impossible on a grand scale. When you're talking about the total of all people, human beings, it's impossible to convince all of them to defy nature. So the natural way of things, people do want to get more. And the other side of that is power begets power. So government wants to grow in size, or people with power want to gain more power. So to believe that communism is actually a plausible type of government means that you're basically brainwashed. You can't actually have communism on planet Earth. It's impossible. Unless you kill all humans and there's only a society of maybe, I don't know, a few dozen people or something. But communism could potentially exist with a small community of very, very like-minded people. In other words, I do believe that if you wanted to have a truly communist government, you would have to do it in a very, very small community, and it would have to be consisting of people that only immigrate to it and are not born into it, and those people all are very like-minded. Maybe you'd have to have some kind of a personality test to prove who they are, but even the children of that society would most likely not be communist because they would see small problems with the society, and thus they would want to get out of it, or they would want to overthrow it by getting more power on their own. So in other words, I don't think communism could exist at all in any way, shape, or form for a long period of time unless there's a very small community and they stayed like-minded and they had a way of exiling or banishing their members if those members tried to get too much power or possessions. So, enough on communism and fascism. I want to go to socialism now, which is where most of these brainwashed college kids and professors want us to think the happy middle place is, where in reality the spectrum is not fascism over here and communism over here and socialism somewhere right here. That's absolutely not false. That's absolutely false. These are all radical ideas that typically do not work on planet Earth. And socialism is, of course, the mandated use of power, state power, to share the wealth. So in other words, we take from the rich, give to the poor. Now, I've mentioned a lot of different types of government, even a plutocracy that I say the US government basically has, and in many regards we have a socialistic plutocracy, I would argue. And it's socialist because yes, we are taxing the rich in this country, we're taxing them very high, and we're giving to the poor, and we have a welfare state that begets more and more people that are poor that don't want to work because they don't have to, because they make roughly the same amount of money as if they didn't do anything at all. So basically, why work if you're going to make basically the same amount of money doing nothing but sitting on your hands at home? Obviously, you'd rather do that than have to go to work every single day, unless you can work harder and get more money. The only problem is, if you're told by society that there's no way to do that, then you're not going to believe it's possible, which is what the mainstream media has done for the last 50 plus years to the African American society within America, or the community, I should say. Nonetheless, there's a lot of use of brainwashing, in fact, in this country, and I don't think I need to sugarcoat that. I think it should be almost self-evident at this point that there's use of propaganda against its people, the United States against its own people, its citizens, you and me, to convince us of certain things that are simply not true. So, now, to prove my point about fascism and why Antifa basically is new neo-Nazis, if fascism is synonymous with, in fact, Nazism, then let's just use some real-world examples. Almost any time you've seen Antifa screaming at other protesters about just about anything, you'll often hear them saying something like, "You're an effing white male," right? And they're trying to silence you, right? They're trying to silence opposition, which is absolutely characteristic of fascism. Completely canceling out opposition using violence, that's fascism. Now, let's take an example where they say, be quiet or shut up or just listen because you're a white male. Now, there's hundreds of these examples that you can find on the internet. I'll show you one right here.
You're fucking a white male! You're a white man! No, I have done my research. Bullshit! Bullshit! You're fucking a white male! That's not a fucking issue. You've never experienced oppression in your entire fucking life. The white guys are right!
That's one that's used in a lot of videos right now. But nonetheless, okay, so using that example for one and hundreds to go with it, let's just make one tiny little tweak, and I think you'll see this from my perspective now. Replace the word white male with Jew. And do you see what I'm talking about? Say, you're a fucking Jew. Be quiet. You're a effing Jew. be quiet, or listen to us. You're an effing white male. Listen to us. You need to listen. You have privilege. So be quiet. All these things, you can see dozens and dozens of videos like this, right? So, I think this should be almost self-evident at this point. It's really not too hard to see, but I know our state-run schools and colleges definitely don't want you to see that dichotomy, and so they make you think that fascism is way over here and communism is over here and socialism is the good juicy spot right in the middle, because communism is too hard to establish and communism requires some kind of authoritarian government which will suppress all of its opposition and end up killing them or sending them to gulags, right, like in the Soviet Union. So we shouldn't even try to do that, but a good socialist government can do it right. But the problem is, socialism also, just like communism, requires people to agree with what's going on, and most people in America simply don't agree anymore that socialism is the right way to go. And if you haven't been able to tell that America's been moving in the direction of socialism for the last 50 years. Even during McCarthyism, seeds were planted for communism, and today the establishment is communist. All of the schools are teaching communism, even though they're not. They're teaching it in an offhand way by sugarcoating it and leaving out details, or convincing you that the opposite of communism is fascism. So it'd be better morally to be communist than fascist, right? Because fascists are racist, right? So I know it's going to be hard for you to red pill yourself with this video alone, so I encourage you to watch many videos. I'll put a few. I have a saved list of videos that I like, so I'll send a few down below for you to maybe red pill yourself a little bit. But if you are part of Antifa, I encourage yourself. The best thing to do right now is to wake up. Wake up to the lies, the brainwashing, the propaganda that exists in this country, which is convincing you that what you're doing is morally correct, because it's not. It's literally not. And let's just say you have your way, and all white males are required to be subjugated to the rule by minorities, and they're not allowed to speak, and if they do speak, they get sent to gulags and they're killed or just left there for the rest of their life. Even if you have that, like, what do you think the chances of that government existing for a long period of time are without the death of millions? I mean, there's millions of white people in America, so I think it's needless to say that it would end up resulting in the death of millions, especially if civilians in this country took up their Second Amendment right and made militias and tried to battle the state or the government. If they lost, that alone would be the death of probably 50 million people or more. So we'll see. But yeah, Antifa, I mean, please watch this video right here from Chris Raygun. Hopefully it'll say what I'm trying to say in a more elegant and fun way that you might be more entertained by. But yeah, whatever it takes, either a more entertaining way or more of a scholarly way of trying to convince you of the same thing, just know that you're basically what you're fighting. What you're fighting is what you are, and it should be self-evident. And so please share this message, and just the best thing, again, the best thing to do is just red pill yourself. Just wake up to what I'm talking about right now, because believe it or not, you are asleep. You've been convinced of one way of thinking and not of what reality is. So, you know, this is your wake-up call. Wake up, guys. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe and bell my channel, just because all of my subscribers don't get my videos at all anymore, so most of my videos I'm posting are getting far less than 100 views. So if you like this video, please subscribe and do the bell, and if you want to support me, there's a number of ways to do so down below. Thank you so much for watching. Destination Truth out.